Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the headlines. Paris's Louvre Museum has reopened now 3 days after the thieves stole historic jewels worth an estimated 88 million euros, which is worth $102 million. Visitors have now returned to the world-famous museum as authorities continue investigating the high-profile heist. Bolivia's newly elected President Rodrigo Paz has raised cautious hopes for reviving the country's long-stalled lithium industry with a more market-friendly approach. Paz plans to review China and Russia's lithium deals for transparency while balancing state control and private investment in the world's largest lithium reserves. Iran faces a severe economic downturn and rising social unrest as renewed UN sanctions target its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Soaring prices and shrinking incomes have left ordinary citizens struggling, while the clerical elite scrambles to shore up control and avoid economic meltdown. The UN World Food Programme has warned that food supplies entering Gaza remain far below the daily target of 2,000 tons, with only 2 crossings open and none to the famine-hit north despite a US-brokered ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced the appointment of Gil Reich as new acting national security advisor. The Israeli military has identified the remains of 2 more hostages returned from Gaza as the deal in which Hamas has promised to return 28 hostage bodies, but logistical challenges delayed the release of several remains. Boeing has received orders for 9 CH-47F Block II Chinook helicopters from the U.S. Army, worth $461 million, according to the company. This order brings the total number of CH-47F Block II aircraft under contract to 18 aircrafts. The anticipated Trump-Putin summit in Budapest is on hold after Russia rejected a ceasefire proposal following the postponement of a Rubio-Lavrov meeting. Meanwhile, a report by the International Service for Human Rights revealed that China and Russia have repeatedly sought to defund UN human rights programs over the past 5 years. Russian strikes on Kyiv targeting energy facilities killed 2 and ignite fires across nearly half the city's districts. Ukrainian officials say the Trump-Putin summit is shelved after Moscow rejects the ceasefire amid escalating tensions between Russia, the US, and Ukraine. Now we move on to our first news. US President Donald Trump has confirmed that he will meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea in 2 weeks' time, saying that he expects a very successful meeting focused on trade. Speaking in Washington, Trump has said that the discussions will center on tariffs and on rebalancing what he described as years of unfair trade practices. He has also emphasized that the hopes for a fair deal, but the talks could still be called off if either side decides to step back. The meeting is expected to take place on the sidelines of next week's APEC Summit amid ongoing tensions between the world's 2 largest economies over tariffs, technology, and market access. Let's listen in to what President Trump has said.
Example, I'm going to see President Xi in 2 weeks, going over to South Korea. We're going to meet in South Korea. We're going to talk about a lot of things. They want to discuss the fact that they're paying 157% tariffs. It's a little higher than they thought. And we're doing very well. I think we're going to do well in that negotiation. We've done well, as you know, with Japan, with South Korea, with Europe. The European nations got together. We made a deal. And it was all based without the tariffs. You could have never made the deal. I'll tell you what, tariffs equal national security. And again, I have a great relationship with President Xi. I expect to be able to make a good deal with him, and I want him to make a good deal for China, but it's got to be fair. For years, they were making $500, $600, $700 billion, and we'd be making nothing. It was a one-sided. Honestly, we built their military. We built China's military with the money that we lost for so many years getting ripped off. So now we're going to have a fair deal. I think we're going to have a very successful meeting. Certainly, there are a lot of people that are waiting for it. Maybe it won't happen. Maybe it won't happen. Things can happen where, for instance, maybe somebody will say, I don't want to meet, it's too nasty. But it's really not nasty, it's just business.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Doctor, now that we see this news, Trump has been calling or looking back at the deals or the trade between China and US and calling it unfair. What do you think are fair in Trump's point of view?
Well, he's obviously looking precisely at the trade imbalance, the mounting trade imbalance actually between China and the United States. But he also knows that it's not something that you can remedy overnight. As he says, as Mr. Trump says, the meeting is going to be surely successful because the two leaders from China and the United States have finally got together and exchanged smiles. But it does not necessarily mean that the trade imbalance seen from the United States is going to be remedied anytime soon.
And how could the outcomes of, if it were to happen, we don't know for sure, but the Trump-Xi trade talks influence the broader security dynamics between US and China, and particularly in Asia-Pacific region?
It is risky if the two leaders, China and the United States, don't meet. I think on a regular basis, those two leaders must meet with or without differences of opinions and the views about their economies and the world. So as the first step, I think it's a welcoming development for the rest of the world and for the rest of the Indo-Pacific region.
And why do you say so, Dr. Taniguchi? Considering the intertwined nature of trade and national security, what risks and opportunities are in this high-stakes summit?
Despite what's going on between the two nations, the United States, Japan, and other nations have already started to change the course by investing more onto their own soils. For instance, Japan has chosen to invest more in its semiconductor industry in Japan, and the United States is doing the same. So the next couple of years, this is going to be a set pattern. And the trade talks and the summit meeting between the two nations, between the two leaders, will affect very little what's going on in this part of the world and in a greater world.
Now, Dr. Taniguchi, allow me to bring Japan into this picture. How might the outcome of US-China trade talk impact Japan, its economic strategy, and its role within Asia-Pacific?
Right. The outright trade war, quote unquote, between the two nations should serve no one's interest, including Japan's. So it's in the interest of everyone, including the Japanese, to see that the trade frictions between the two nations, the United States, Japan, will continue to be somehow under control, somehow managed. And so long as that's the case, it would not affect that much the ongoing situation, which is already worsened because of the tariffs that the United States has imposed upon other nations, including Japan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, for joining us and sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to travel to Japan between October 27th and 29th. This comes as President Trump is set to travel to South Korea on October 29th to attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara has issued a statement saying Japan has invited President Donald Trump. He further stated that during the visit, President Trump would meet with the Emperor of Japan and the newly elected Prime Minister Takaichi. As Prime Minister Takaichi begins her term, the Japanese government is finalizing a purchase package, including U.S. pickups, soybeans, and gas, to present to President Donald Trump during trade and security talks. However, there are reports that the newly elected government is not keen on any new defense spending, which Washington has consistently pressed Japan and other allies to increase. This will be President Trump's first visit to Japan since his re-election, following an agreement by Takaichi's predecessor, Shigeru Ishiba, to invest as much as $550 billion in the U.S. in exchange for lower auto tariffs.
トランプ米国大統領を日本に招待することとなりました。滞在期間は10月27日から10月29日までの予定です。滞在中、天皇陛下はトランプ大統領とご会見になる予定です。また、高市総理はトランプ大統領と会談する予定です。トランプ大統領をお迎えすることは、日米同盟のさらなる強化にとって極めて有意義な機会であり、日本政府としてトランプ大統領の訪日を心から歓迎しています。
北朝鮮のミサイル発射についてお伺いします。韓国軍が北朝鮮が北東に向けて弾道ミサイルを
狙いですけれども、高市総理とトランプ大統領との間の最初の対面での日米首脳会談となるので、米首脳が両首脳が個人的な信頼関係を構築し、日米同盟のさらなる強化、そして自由で開かれたインド太平洋の実現に向けて、共に協力していく関係を築いていく機会としたいと。
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Thank you very much, Doctor, for staying with us. Now, looking at this is very exciting as Prime Minister Takaichi prepares to engage with President Trump and being his first visit to Japan this term. How should Japan navigate the pressure to increase defense spending without compromising its domestic economic priorities and also public sentiment? And what do you think will be the strength that Takaichi brings to the table this time?
I am not sure if the amount of defense spending or the amount of purchase of defense equipment from the United States is going to be one of the biggest issues to be discussed between the two leaders. The crux of the meeting, I believe, is going to make the relationship smooth and better. And on the part of the United States, we've been hearing that President Trump is very much interested, curious to see Ms. Takaichi as the first female Prime Minister of Japan. Also, Ms. Takaichi as Shinzo Abe's protege. It's been widely known whenever Trump thinks of Japan, whenever Trump thinks of Japanese leaders, he always remembers his good friend of Shinzo Abe. So I think Mr. Trump should be very much curious to see Ms. Takaichi and understand what kind of politician, what kind of leader Ms. Takaichi is like. Certainly, Mr. Trump may be interested in selling more defense equipment to Japan, but Japan is in the course of spending more on defense, and obviously Japan is going to buy more long-range missiles and so on. So its shopping list is already very, very long, and that is something that Mr. Trump has been aware of.
And Doctor, building on your answer, as you mentioned that defense spending might not be the sticking point between U.S. and Trump, do you have any other sticking points that you could think of between Japan and U.S.?
Well, this meeting that's going to take place between the two leaders is going to be one that would set the course for the future of the, let's say, joint leadership between the United States and Japan. So on the part of Ms. Takaichi, it would be very much important for her to reassure to the US president that Japan is going to take its own fair share, not only about defense build-up, but also about economic revitalization, or pursuing multilateral diplomacy involving countries such as the Philippines. So there may be a lot of elements and issues that the two leaders will have to discuss.
And Dr. Taniguchi, considering Japan's history of making large economic concessions, such as the recent 550 billion investment under the previous administration, so what strategies should the new government adopt to ensure more balanced and mutually beneficial negotiations with U.S.?
The biggest and the most difficult part of this round of trade negotiations has been over, and I think one should salute the previous government, Ishiba's government, that has completed the deal with the United States. So both nations are at the stage, fulfilling the promise, yet new.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tomohiko, for sharing that. We're having some network issues with him, so we will move on. Thank you very much, Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. Now we move on. North Korea has fired multiple ballistic missiles. This marks its first such launch in months. The launch comes just a week before world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, to descend on South Korea for the APEC Summit. South Korea's military has said that it has detected several projectiles that are believed to be short-range ballistic missiles fired towards the East Sea. Seoul has stated that the missiles flew a distance of some 350 kilometers. North Korea had last fired short-range ballistic and cruise missiles towards the East Sea in May. This makes the latest launch the first one under South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung. According to media reports, experts have also warned that North Korea could launch missile tests before or during the APEC Summit to underscore its commitment to being recognized as a nuclear-armed state. Meanwhile, Japanese Cabinet Chief Secretary Minoru Kihara has said that Japan would continue to work closely with the U.S. in response to North Korea's latest missile launch. Let's listen in.
ミサイル警戒データのリアルタイム共有などを含めまして、日米間で緊密に連携をしております。対応に万全を期しているところ、今回の発射についても政府として把握をしております。我が国の領域や排他的経済水域へのミサイルの飛来は確認されておらず、また関係機関からの被害報告等の情報は確認されておりません。
Now we move on to our next news. Peru's interim president Jorge Heri on Tuesday has declared a 30-day state of emergency in the capital, Lima, and the neighborhood province of Callao, saying the move is to battle rising crime. The announcement follows protests last week that has left one person dead and more than 100 injured. President Jerry has said that the measure is approved by the Council of Ministers and authorizes the deployment of the armed forces alongside the police to maintain public order. This move comes as President Jose Harry faces his major protest called by civil society groups and young people from the Gen Z demanding measures against rising crime. This is not the first time Peru has enacted a state of emergency to address a security concern, as former President Boluarte also imposed the same 30-day measure in March. Let's listen into what President Harry has said.
Compatriotas, la delincuencia ha crecido de manera desmesurada en los últimos años, causando un enorme dolor en miles de familias y perjudicando además el progreso del país. Pero esto se acabó. Hoy empezamos a cambiar la historia en la lucha contra la inseguridad en el Perú. El estado de emergencia aprobado por el Consejo de Ministros entra en vigencia a las 00 horas y por 30 días en Lima Metropolitana y el Callao. Y presenta un nuevo enfoque. Pasamos de la defensiva a la ofensiva en la lucha contra el crimen. Una lucha que nos permitirá recuperar la paz, la tranquilidad y la confianza de millones de peruanos. Las guerras se ganan con acciones, no con palabras. ¡Viva el Perú! ¡Viva!
Now we move on to our next news. According to media reports, China is in talks with Japan and South Korea about a possible trilateral currency swap. This comes amid U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war. The currency swap aims to bolster the region's financial safety net and deepen economic cooperation. According to reports, Governor of the People's Bank of China, Pan Gongsheng, has discussed the issue with his South Korean and Japanese counterpart, Ri Chang-yong and Kazuo Ueda, on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meeting in Washington last week. Currency swaps are an often used tool between central banks to provide local currency liquidity. It can also offer financial relief during debt crisis on top of rescue operations by multilateral institutions. This discussion comes amid a long-standing bid by China to boost the overseas use of the yuan. In order to counter the US dollar, China also aims to promote a free trade deal among the 3 East Asian nations, whose combined economic size accounts for a quarter of the world's total trade deal. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.